The drive felt endless, the asphalt narrowing into a cracked ribbon of tar, then crumbling into a gravel track that wound through a tunnel of ancient, skeletal trees. Each mile deepened the silence, the hum of my old sedan the only persistent sound against the growing quiet of the countryside. I'd left the last gas station, the last flickering sign of human commerce, an hour ago. That suited me fine. My life, by choice, was a quiet affair, filled with the focused hush of my workshop, the careful scrape of a restorer's blade, the scent of aged wood and beeswax. Precision, patience, and a deep respect for history, these were the tenets I lived by. This new project, however, felt less like an undertaking and more like an absorption. The solicitor's words still echoed a significant inheritance, Reid. A rather singular property. Singular was an understatement. The manor emerged from the gloom like a sleeping leviathan, a silhouette against a bruised, late-afternoon sky. It wasn't merely old, it was ancient, its stone skin mottled with lichen and moss, its windows like vacant eyes staring out from under heavy, sagging brows of ivy. The iron gates, rusted to the color of dried blood, hung half-open on broken hinges, inviting me into a wilderness of overgrown gardens. Twisted oaks clawed at the slate roof, and what must have once been manicured lawns were now a tangled, waist-high jungle. A shiver, not entirely from the crisp autumn air, traced a path down my spine. I parked the car, the crunch of gravel beneath the tires shockingly loud in the profound stillness. Stepping out, the world seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick and damp, carrying the scent of wet earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something metallic and faint, like old rust mixed with dust. My breath plumed in front of me, a visible tremor of my own existence in this forgotten place. The front door, a massive slab of weathered oak, was already ajar, left that way by the estate agent who'd dropped off the keys earlier. He'd made his excuses quickly, his voice a little too jovial, his departure almost a sprint. I understood why. Standing on the crumbling porch, I felt the manor's immense weight, its silent, oppressive presence. It wasn't just a house, it was a monument to neglect, a tomb of forgotten lives. I pushed the door open further, the groan of protesting would echoing through the cavernous entrance hall. My hand fumbled for the heavy brass switch plate beside the door. A click. Nothing. Of course. No power. Retrieving my powerful LED lantern from my satchel, I flicked it on. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a tableau of faded grandeur and profound decay. Dust motes danced like frantic spirits in the light. A heavy Persian rug, once vibrant, was now a tattered landscape of gray, its patterns lost beneath layers of grime. Cobwebs, thick as spun sugar, draped from every corner, swaying imperceptibly in the still air. My gaze drifted upwards, past the peeling wallpaper and the elaborate, tarnished chandeliers, to a gallery that ran around the upper floor. It was a dizzying space, too large, too silent. My professional eye, usually quick to assess damage and potential, felt overwhelmed. This wasn't just a project, it was an archaeological dig. The furniture, draped in white sheets, looked like an assembly of ghosts. I pulled back a sheet from a grand piano in what must have been the drawing room. Its keys were yellowed, some chipped, others missing. I ran a finger over the dust-caked ivory, wondering who had last played it, what melodies had once filled these silent halls. The ground floor explored, I found the main staircase. But even here, the decay was evident. The wood groaned under my weight as I ascended, the sound amplified in the vast emptiness. Upstairs, the atmosphere shifted.
different.
I moved from room to room, my lantern beam illuminating vast, empty chambers, each with its own peculiar scent, lavender in one, mildew in another, a faint, metallic tang that made me wrinkle my nose in a third.
Most of the doors stood ajar, like mouths agape. Then I found it.
Tucked away at the very end of a long, narrow wing, beyond a series of identical, small, cell-like rooms, was a heavy, iron-bound door.
It was unlike any other door in the manor, utilitarian and stark. My curiosity, a professional instinct that had always driven me, pulled me forward. The wood was rough, unpolished, scarred. No intricate carvings here, just brutal functionality. I pushed. It swung inward with a protesting groan, revealing a passage that sent a jolt of genuine unease through me. It was a long, unlit corridor, exceptionally narrow, lined on both sides by what looked like heavy, iron-barred doors, each with a small, sliding viewport. The air here was utterly dead, stale and heavy, thick with the scent of stagnant water and something else, something deeply unpleasant and old, like forgotten fear. This wasn't a part of the manor's grand design. This was something else entirely. It felt like a deliberate, concealed space. The phrase sprang unbidden into my mind, startling me with its specificity. What kind of manor had such a place? My meticulous nature, my determination to restore, suddenly felt flimsy against the weight of this discovery. The manor wasn't just old, it was a repository of something truly unsettling, a history deliberately buried, now waiting for me to unearth it. I had arrived, and the house had already begun to show its teeth. The manor's interior was a mausoleum of forgotten aspirations. I spent the first few days simply assessing, walking through each cavernous room, notebook in hand, sketching out plans. My mind, usually a precise instrument, felt a little dulled by the sheer scale of the task ahead. This wasn't just a restoration, it was an excavation. I decided to start small, a single room, to find my rhythm. The library seemed like the logical choice. It was less imposing than the ballroom, and the books, though neglected, promised a kind of silent company. Clearing the library was a monumental effort. Each volume, brittle with age, needed to be carefully brushed, catalogued, and moved to temporary storage. The shelves themselves were ornate, dark oak, warped and splintered in places, their surfaces gritty with generations of dust. I set up my worklight, a bright, focused beam that cut through the gloom, creating a small island of clarity in the vast, shadowed space. My tools, chisels, mallets, various grades of sandpaper, pots of solvent and varnish, were laid out with my usual meticulous care on a canvas drop cloth spread over a sturdy old writing desk I'd pulled into the room. The methodical nature of the work was a comfort. I lost myself in the grain of the wood, the subtle shift of a joint, the quiet scrape of a fine file. I found myself listening to those creaks, trying to discern if they were the natural size of an old structure settling or something more. It started subtly. I'd be engrossed in sanding a particularly stubborn patch of veneer, my concentration absolute, when a tool would simply vanish. I'd reach for the small gouge I'd just used, only to find the spot empty. I'd search the immediate vicinity, growing irritated, convinced I'd misplaced it in my own absorption. Eventually, I'd find it, sometimes on a higher shelf than I could have possibly put it, or tucked beneath a stack of books I hadn't touched in hours. My internal monologue would chastise me for my absent-mindedness, for letting my focus waver. But it happened too often, always with the same tools, always when my back was turned, always in a way that defied simple explanation.
Then came the sounds. Not the house's usual groans, but distinct, sharp noises. A faint scratching, like claws on plaster, seemed to emanate from the wall behind the largest bookshelf. I'd pause, hold my breath, and it would cease. A floorboard would creak, loud and deliberate, from the floor directly above me, even though I knew the upper levels were completely empty. I'd walk out into the hall, crane my neck up the grand staircase, and find only the same vast, echoing emptiness. It was soft, like dry leaves skittering across stone, but it was there, right at the edge of my hearing. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a suggestion of them, a breathy sigh that seemed to curl around me from somewhere behind the stacks of books. I spun around, my heart giving a clumsy thump against my ribs. Nothing. Just the rows of silent spines, the dust motes still dancing in the dying light. My hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. I tried to rationalize it away, the wind playing tricks, the house settling, my own fatigue. But the feeling of being observed, of not being alone, began to solidify. It wasn't a comforting presence, but an invasive one, like an unseen eye boring into the back of my neck. Each time, there was nothing. One evening, while cleaning out an old desk drawer I'd found tucked away in a dusty corner of the library, I discovered a stack of brittle, yellowed papers. Most were mundane, old invoices or forgotten correspondence, but one document caught my eye. It was a faded architectural drawing, dated nearly 2 centuries prior, detailing a section of the manor's original layout that no longer seemed to exist. The lines were intricate, indicating a complex series of subterranean passages and sealed-off chambers beneath the main structure. My finger traced a particular section, marked with an ominous, almost illegible script. With careful deciphering, I made out the words, "Old Death Row Corridor marked for closure." The phrase sent a shiver down my spine, a jarring anomaly in the context of a grand manor house. What kind of history could possibly involve such a place? I folded the drawing carefully, the brittle paper crackling like dry bones. I was no longer just restoring a house, I was uncovering something that perhaps should have remained buried. And whatever it was, I felt it watching me, closer now than ever before. The air in the library, thick with the scent of decaying paper and forgotten wood polish, seemed to press in on me. In this grand, if neglected, testament to wealth and faded glory. What connection could a place of such grim finality have with a manor house? My restorer's instincts, usually a comforting hum of analytical observation, now prickled with a nervous energy, urging me to find the anomaly, the crack in the facade. I moved along the towering bookshelves, my fingers trailing over spines that crumbled at the lightest touch. The sheer volume of books was overwhelming, a testament to someone's vast, if eclectic, knowledge. But it wasn't the books that held my attention. It was the architecture. I ran my hand along the oak paneling that lined the lower half of the walls, feeling for any slight imperfection, any deviation from the expected pattern. My thumb brushed against a section near the large, dust-shrouded fireplace, where the grain of the wood felt marginally different. A faint, almost imperceptible seam. My heart gave a little jolt. This was it. The kind of subtle detail I lived for, the hidden craftsmanship that spoke of secrets. I pressed harder, then tried a gentle, exploratory push. Nothing. I knelt, examining the seam closer, tracing it with a fingernail. It wasn't a natural join in the wood. It was too precise, too deliberate. There had to be a mechanism. I spent the next hour, perhaps more, meticulously checking every inch of the surrounding paneling, feeling for a hidden latch, a pressure point, a discreet lever. My determination was absolute, eclipsing the growing unease. The library was silent, save for the faint creak of the old house settling and the whisper of dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that pierced the grimy windows. Finally, my fingers found it. A tiny, almost invisible button disguised as a knot in the wood, tucked away beneath the mantelpiece. I pressed it. Something dry and ancient. I retrieved my lantern from my toolkit, its beam cutting through the gloom. The recess wasn't deep, perhaps only a few feet, but it was enough to conceal something. Stacked neatly on a small, rickety shelf within the cavity were several leather-bound journals, their covers brittle and cracked with age. Beside them lay a small, tarnished brass key and a folded, yellowed map. My pulse quickened. This was more than just a hidden compartment, it was a deliberate concealment. I carefully extracted the topmost journal. Its pages were thin, brittle, filled with elegant, sloping script that had faded to sepia. The first entry, dated over a century ago, spoke of the manor's original owner, a reclusive figure named Elias Thorne. His words were formal, almost poetic, but a thread of obsession ran through them. It craves the forgotten. Its influence spreads, even through stone and earth. Thorne sought to contain it, but I fear he only angered it. My own memories fray at the edges, like old lace. My breath hitched. The map lay open beside it, hastily sketched lines detailing the manor's sprawling grounds, with a heavily circled area far to the northwest, simply labeled the corridor. No further explanation. Just that single, stark phrase. I stood up, my knees protesting. I meant to walk over to the window, to look out at the grounds, to ground myself in the familiar sight of the decaying gardens. But as I took a step, I paused. What was I going to do? Where was I heading? For a fleeting, disorienting moment, the layout of the library, so recently explored and catalogued in my mind, felt alien. The position of the heavy oak desk, the arrangement of the chairs, even the angle of the light from the tall windows, it all seemed wrong. Not drastically, but subtly off-kilter, like a photograph slightly out of focus. I blinked, shaking my head. It passed. The library reasserted its familiar form, the furniture settling back into its expected places. My mind must be playing tricks on me, I decided, a result of the isolation, the sheer volume of work, and the unsettling discovery I just made. Stress. That was all it was. Exhaustion manifesting as a momentary spatial disconnect. I picked up the journal again, my fingers tracing the faded script. Elias Thorne. The reclusive owner. What had he been trying to contain? And what did it mean, it craves the forgotten? I had to know more. This wasn't just a record of local oddities, it was a testament to something predatory, something that had feasted on the very fabric of identity within these walls. Sleep that night was a fractured landscape of disjointed images and oppressive sensations. I dreamt I was meticulously restoring a familiar antique desk, but as my fingers traced the grain, the wood warped, turning to soft clay, then to something like dried blood. Faces, indistinct and featureless, pressed against the window panes, their mouths moving in silent screams. The clock on the bedside table read 3:17 a.m. I couldn't remember falling asleep, or even getting into bed. Had I been working?
the last thing I clearly recalled was the journal. The building was a squat, utilitarian structure, smelling faintly of mildew and forgotten aspirations. A lone clerk, a woman with spectacles perched on her nose, directed me to the microfiche readers. "Anything specific?" she asked. "Unusual occurrences, anything out of the ordinary." Hours bled into one another. The hum of the microfiche machine was a hypnotic drone as I scrolled through blurry newspaper clippings, faded property deeds, and handwritten municipal logs. Initially, the records were sparse, focusing on agricultural yields and property transfers. Then, a pattern began to emerge, faint at first, like watermarks on ancient paper. A short article from 1887 detailed the inexplicable disappearance of a groundskeeper from the manor. No body, no struggle, just an empty cottage and a bewildered family. The account quickly faded from the local news, almost as if it had never happened. Another clipping, from 1912, spoke of the peculiar affliction of a manor occupant, a distant relative of the original owners, who had begun to claim he was a completely different person, speaking in a dialect no one recognized, his memories utterly rewritten. The article ended abruptly, mentioning his relocation to a specialized care facility, but the specific location was conspicuously absent. The forbidden words, I noted, were carefully avoided even then. I found references to other vanishings, always connected to the manor or its immediate vicinity. A stable hand in the 1930s. A visiting scholar in the 1950s, researching local folklore. Each disappearance was treated with a strange, almost dismissive brevity in the records, as if the town itself had collectively agreed to forget. The accounts were fragmented, disjointed, like pieces of a shattered mirror. They didn't explicitly mention an entity, but the underlying current of unease, of something wrong with the manor, was palpable. The most disturbing discovery came from an old, leather-bound ledger, detailing the manor's expansion in the late 19th century. Deemed structurally sound for continued containment. Containment? My blood felt sluggish in my veins. What had the manor contained? The thought that such a place existed beneath the very floorboards I walked on made the air in the archives feel thin and cloying. I glanced up from the ledger, expecting to see the clerk, but the room was empty. The microfiche machine still hummed, a low, mechanical growl. Had she left? I couldn't remember seeing her go. How long had I been alone? Back at the manor, the psychological assault intensified. The research had opened a door, and whatever was behind it was now pressing closer. The knife in my hand felt alien, heavy. I remembered wanting to make dinner, but the intervening steps, the decision to cook, were gone. Nightmares twisted into waking life. I saw fleeting figures in the periphery of my vision, a tall, gaunt shape in the hallway, a flicker of movement behind the dusty curtains. I'd turn, heart hammering, only to find empty space. They didn't form words, not truly, but they carried a tone, an inflection of malicious glee, of hunger. One evening, while examining a loose floorboard in the west wing, a draft of impossibly cold air brushed my face. The scent of ozone and something metallic, like old pennies, filled my nostrils. Curiosity warred with a primal urge to seal it shut. Armed with a strong lantern, I squeezed through. The passage was unlined rock, rough and uneven, sloping downwards. Then, the wall smoothed, transitioning to rough-hewn concrete. On either side, heavy, bolted doors, rusted and scarred, lined the walls. This was it. I could almost hear the echoes of despair, the final breaths. I felt a profound sense of wrongness, of a place steeped in suffering, now repurposed as a feeding ground. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from somewhere down the corridor, like bone snapping. I flinched, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a cry. I shone the light frantically, but saw nothing. Yet, the air felt thick, heavy with an unseen presence. The memory had frayed. The edges were gone. Containment? My blood felt sluggish in my veins. What had the manor contained? This wasn't just a grand house, it was a structure with a profoundly dark past, integrating elements that spoke of incarceration and finality. The thought that such a place existed beneath. It was a chilling revelation, one that settled deep in my bones. With a grunt, I pulled the door open, the ancient hinges groaning a protest that echoed down into the absolute blackness beyond. The air here was different. It tasted of dust and stale despair, a cloying sweetness that hinted at something organic, long decayed. On either side, heavy wooden doors, each with a small, barred aperture, lined the corridor like a row of silent, waiting eyes. Each door had a number etched into a small metal plate, faded but still legible, 1, 2, 3. I didn't want to think about what those numbers signified. I walked slowly, my headlamp beam sweeping across the grim tableau. There was no light source down here, no windows, just this suffocating tunnel. The scale was disturbing. Who built this? And why was it part of a manor house? The logical part of my brain screamed for answers, but the primal part just wanted to turn and run. I spun around, my heart giving a hard thump against my ribs, but there was nothing. Just the unbroken line of cell doors stretching back into the gloom. The further I went, the stronger the feeling of being watched became. Not by something physical, but by a presence, a weight in the air that pressed down on my chest. Then I heard it. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a suggestion of sound, like someone trying to speak with a parched throat. I stopped dead, my headlamp beam fixed on door number 7. Hello? My voice was a reedy croak, swallowed almost instantly by the vast quiet. It sounded like my own name. Reid. My skin crawled. There was no one else down here. I was alone. I had to be alone. My mind, usually so sharp and ordered, began to stutter. Was I tired? Overwhelmed by the discovery? The wood was rough, splintered in places, and the small barred opening was a black rectangle. I peered through, my headlamp illuminating only a small, empty space. Dust motes danced in the beam. Nothing. But as I pulled back, my reflection shimmered briefly in the grimy surface of the bars. And for a split second, it wasn't my face looking back. It was a stranger's face, yet it wore my expression, contorted into a silent scream. I recoiled with a gasp, stumbling back, my hand flying to my mouth. That wasn't real. It couldn't be. My mind was playing tricks on me, the stress of this house finally getting to me. Just dust, I muttered, trying to ground myself, my voice trembling. Just fatigue. I forced myself to look again. This time, my own reflection stared back, pale and shaken, but undeniably mine. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I needed to get a grip. But the entity wasn't done. Do you remember? Remember what? My mind felt suddenly sluggish, like trying to recall a dream that was already fading. The details were there, but they felt distant. Like looking at a photograph of someone else's life. This wasn't just a trick of the light or sound. This was an attack. It was trying to unravel me. "I remember everything," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "I'm Reid. An antique restorer. I live in. The name of my hometown, the street I grew up on, even the name of my old workshop, they all hovered just beyond my grasp, like words on the tip of my tongue that refused to materialize." A panicked laugh bubbled up, high-pitched and hysterical. This was absurd. I knew these things. "You were always here, Reid. Always trapped." "No. I wasn't trapped. I was a meticulous restorer, a man of detail and precision." But as I clutched at these memories, they felt fragile, like old paper crumbling in my hands. Was I really just making them up? Had I always been in this corridor? The thought was a sickening jolt. As my light fell upon it, the stain seemed to ripple, and from its depths, a distorted image began to rise. It wasn't a reflection this time, but a swirling, indistinct shape, coalescing into something vaguely humanoid, writhing and indistinct, like smoke trying to hold a form. It didn't have eyes, but I felt its gaze, a piercing scrutiny that stripped away layers of my being. It didn't speak, but its presence screamed a single, terrifying truth: it was feeding. Feeding on my memories, on my sense of who I was. Panic seized me, raw and absolute. My name, my past, my life, they were slipping away, like water through a sieve. "I am Reid!" I screamed. The entity pulsed, its formless shape seeming to expand, to fill the corridor, pressing in on me from all sides. The lines between what was real and what was a manufactured delusion blurred, then dissolved entirely. No. I wasn't trapped. The thought itself was an insult to my precision, my meticulous nature. I was Reid, an antique restorer, a man who dealt in the tangible, the verifiable. The scent of aged mahogany, the whisper of fine sandpaper over a delicate curve, these were not fabrications. They were facts. My hands, calloused and knowing, were proof. This house, this inheritance, was simply a project. A very large, very demanding project. I pushed myself up from the dust-caked floor where I'd found myself, my knees protesting. My head throbbed, a dull ache behind my eyes. That would cut through this. This haze. The main entrance. That was the logical first step. I navigated the labyrinthine ground floor, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the warped floorboards. Each shadow seemed to lengthen, to twist into something watchful. My breath plumed faintly in the frigid air, even though it wasn't winter. I reached the massive oak double doors, pitted and scarred, that served as the manor's front. I pushed. Nothing. I pushed harder, leaning my weight into it. The latch didn't budge. I tried the other door, then both together, grunting with effort. A faint, mocking creak seemed to emanate from the wood itself, a low groan of resistance. No lock, no bolt I could see, yet the doors were utterly immovable, as if the very stone of the house had flowed around them, solidifying them in place. Just stuck. My phone. I always had my phone. I patted my pockets, jacket, trousers. Where was it? I remembered placing it on the workbench in the main hall,
just by the old grandfather clock, yesterday. Or was it the day before? The details were fuzzy. I hurried back, my steps quicker now, a frantic edge to them. The workbench was there, piled with tools, rags, bottles of solvents. No phone. I swept my hand across the surface, knocking a small chisel to the floor with a clatter. Dust bunnies the size of small animals stared back at me. My mind raced. Had I left it in the kitchen? The library? Every room I entered seemed to stretch, to warp, the distances between them growing. The air here was heavy with a smell I couldn't quite place, something like damp plaster and forgotten meals, mingled with an acrid, metallic tang. I was searching for my phone, wasn't I? Why was I in the servants' quarters? A wave of confusion washed over me, disorienting and nauseating. What was I doing? What was I supposed to be doing? The memory of the phone, of needing to call for help, felt suddenly distant, almost irrelevant. Had I even had a phone? The thought was absurd, yet it lingered, insidious. I stumbled, my hand catching the rough, flaking plaster of a wall to steady myself. My fingers scraped against something hard and metallic embedded in the plaster. I pulled at it, dislodging flakes of paint and grit. It was a small, ornate key, tarnished with age, its teeth intricate and complex. A key to what? I had no memory of seeing it before. Then, a flicker. A memory, but not mine, or not entirely. And a name, whispered in the darkness, Reid. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the image. It wasn't a memory, it was an intrusion. This was the entity, wasn't it? Twisting my thoughts, planting seeds of doubt. I squeezed the key in my hand, its cold metal a small anchor. I found myself descending a set of narrow, winding stairs I didn't recall using before. The stairs opened into a long, low-ceilinged passage. The walls here were stark, unadorned stone, slick with condensation. The air was still, utterly devoid of natural light. And then I saw it. My breath hitched. Death row? Closure? This was a manor house, an antique property. What was this? The corridor stretched endlessly before me, lined with heavy, bolted doors, each one numbered, the paint faded and cracked. The numbers seemed to swim before my eyes, shifting, blurring. I looked at the key in my hand. Could it be for one of these doors? The thought was terrifying, compelling. This was an event. The house wasn't just old, it was something else. Something that shouldn't exist. My hand trembled as I lifted the key, feeling its weight. What if one of these doors opened to something truly unspeakable? Or worse, what if it opened to nothing at all, just another layer of this suffocating illusion? My attempts to escape, to contact the outside world, felt like the futile struggles of an insect caught in amber. The house wasn't just thwarting me, it was actively consuming me, piece by piece, memory by memory. I wasn't just trapped. I was dissolving. My phone. I always had my phone. I patted my pockets, jacket, trousers. Panic, cold and sharp, began to cut through the haze. Where was it? Or was it the day before? The details were fuzzy. I hurried back to the hall, my steps echoing a little too loudly on the flagstones. The workbench stood empty. No phone.
I ran a hand through my hair, the grit of forgotten days clinging to my fingertips. Dust. Always dust. It coated everything, a fine, gray shroud that seemed to absorb light and sound. The grandfather clock, its face a tarnished brass moon, stood silent, its pendulum still. How long had it been stopped? I couldn't recall winding it. Had I forgotten that too? Not a shadow, not a draft, but something behind the clock. I pressed against it, feeling the aged timber give slightly. A hidden catch. My fingers, accustomed to finding the invisible seams in antique furniture, traced the outline. Inside, nestled amongst cobwebs thick as spun sugar, was a leather-bound journal. Its covers were brittle, its pages yellowed and foxed with age. It wasn't mine. It bore no name, only a symbol embossed on the front, a jagged, incomplete circle, like a bite taken out of a full moon. My hands trembled as I pulled it free. The air in the recess was stale, heavy with the scent of old paper and something else. I carried the journal to the nearest window, letting the weak, overcast light fall across its delicate pages. The script was an elegant, spidery hand, fading in places but still legible. It was a chronicle, spanning generations, written by various occupants of this very house. The entries were disjointed, rambling at times, but a horrifying pattern emerged. The earliest entries spoke of the land itself, long before the manor stood. Well, between something in here, thinned. It wasn't a spirit, the old texts insisted, nor a demon. It was a fundamental absence, a parasitic emptiness that sought to fill itself with being. It wasn't interested in blood or life, not in the way a predator was. It craved the ephemeral, the unique construct of self. Memories. Identity. The intricate tapestry of experiences, emotions, and thoughts that made a person who they were. It didn't kill. It erased. A marionette with its strings cut. The later entries, more desperate, detailed the lengths to which previous manor owners had gone to appease it. A willing surrender. A slow, deliberate feeding of one's entire being into its maw, to sate its hunger for a time. This wasn't just about preserving the property, it was about protecting myself. My own memory loss, the blurring of days, the missing phone. It wasn't some natural deterioration. It wasn't. It had begun to feed. The journal described how the entity, once appeased, would retreat into a specific part of the house, a place where its victims' echoes lingered, a sort of spectral archive. It was a place designed to contain the accumulated remnants, a holding pen for stolen selves. That name. I knew that name. I'd seen it on an old architectural blueprint I'd found tucked away in the library, a section of the house that had been walled off, repurposed, its true nature obscured by layers of plaster and new construction. It wasn't a metaphor. My hands shook, the old leather of the journal feeling slimy in my grasp. The truth was a physical weight, pressing down on me, squeezing the air from my lungs. The ultimate cost. It wasn't death. It was worse. It was the complete, utter annihilation of Reid. Not just my body, but everything that made me me. My memories of my parents, my childhood, my passion for restoration, the smell of linseed oil, the specific grain of oak, the satisfaction of a perfectly mended joint. All of it, gone. Reduced to sustenance for an ancient, nameless hunger. It was coming from below, from deep within the earth. From the foundations. From that corridor.
The journal slipped from my grasp, falling with a soft thud onto the flagstones. The pages fanned open to a final, desperate entry, scrawled.
In a frantic hand it wakes. It demands. The corridor calls. My legs moved before my mind could process the command. My legs had moved, that much I knew, but the ground beneath me felt less like solid stone and more like a shallow, murky pool of static. Each step was a way through a forgotten frequency, a ghost of a sound that never quite coalesced into a whisper. The air here was thick with a scent I couldn't place, something metallic, like old blood on rusted iron, mixed with the cloying sweetness of decaying flowers. It clung to the back of my throat, a taste of metallic dust and forgotten dreams. Overhead, the ceiling was a distant blur, lost in the permanent gloom. There were indentations, regularly spaced, where heavy doors must have once been. Now, only gaping maw-like openings remained, leading into absolute, impenetrable blackness. This was it, wasn't it? The archive. The place where it stored what it took. I could almost feel the residual echoes of identity, thin, reedy vibrations in the air, like a chorus of distant, forgotten names. Who was I talking to yesterday? The face of a colleague flickered, then dissolved into a featureless mask. This wasn't just erosion, it was a systematic dismantling, piece by agonizing piece. What good was a chisel or a fine-haired brush against something that consumed the essence of being? Then, a flicker. Not a memory, not a thought, but an intuition, sharp and sudden, like a splinter of ice in the fog of my mind. It fed on memory. It consumed identity. It became what it took, or at least, absorbed its essence. What if I could give it something so profoundly potent, so utterly me, that it would choke on it? Not a physical choke, but a conceptual one. A paradox. My own name, Reid, felt foreign on my tongue, a word I was trying on for the first time. But within that foreignness, a desperate resolve began to coalesce. This wasn't about saving the manor, or even saving my memories in their entirety. This was about a final, desperate act of defiance. If it wanted me, truly wanted the core of my being, then I would give it, but on my terms. The plan, if it could be called a plan, was forming in fragments, like shards of broken glass reflecting a terrible truth. I would create a memory. Not a false one, not exactly. My meticulousness. My obsession with detail. My need to restore, to make whole. And within that, a trap. The entity sought to erase me. What if I offered it an identity so complex, so intricately woven with contradictions and self-referential loops, that it would get lost within it? A labyrinth of self. It would be like offering a predator a meal laced with poison, not physical, but existential. It would consume it, yes, but it would become entangled, perhaps even contained, by the very act of consumption. The cost. The cost was clear, even through the haze. If I offered up the core of my identity, even as a weapon, then that core would be gone. I would be something else. A vessel, perhaps, or an empty frame. It would be a self-inflicted lobotomy of the soul. A small, tarnished brass plaque. Yet, the idea of a plaque, something marking something, something defining, sparked another piece of the puzzle. The manor itself. Its history, its decay, its secrets. It wasn't just my memories it wanted the story, the narrative. To the great hall, perhaps,
or the study where I had first begun my restoration. I would use the tools of my trade, not to restore, but to deconstruct. I would create a physical manifestation of this conceptual trap, something tangible that the entity, through its influence on my perception, would be drawn to. The tension in my chest was a vice, tightening with every breath. This wasn't courage, it was the raw, desperate instinct of a cornered animal. Could I even trust the thoughts forming in my mind? I didn't know. But the alternative was worse. The slow, agonizing fade into nothingness, leaving only an empty shell. No, I wouldn't allow that. If I was to be consumed, I would go out in a blaze, a final, defiant act of creation. And destruction. I would give it Reid, the meticulous restorer, the man obsessed with history and detail, but I would make that gift a trap. I would make myself a poison. I turned, the blackness of the corridor behind me seeming to deepen, to pulse with an unseen hunger. My legs, though weary, felt a new, grim purpose. I gripped the small, intricately carved box tighter in my hand. It was made of black walnut, heavy and cool against my palm, its surface polished to a mirror sheen with hours of my meticulous work. This wasn't just an antique, it was the focal point of my desperate plan. I'd found it hidden behind a loose panel in the manor's deepest sub-basement, an object designed for containment, for sealing away something that shouldn't exist. My research, pieced together from fragmented journals and cryptic architectural drawings, suggested this corridor was the nexus, the place where the veil between what was and what could be was thinnest. The corridor stretched before me, a tunnel of absolute shadow, the stone walls weeping with a cold dampness that clung to my clothes. It was waiting. My voice sounded thin, alien. I forced one foot in front of the other, each step a deliberate act of defiance against the growing pressure in my skull. The static beneath my feet intensified, now a low thrumming that vibrated up my spine. Then it began. A flicker at the edge of my vision. It was my own voice, but distorted, elongated, like a memory stretched thin. "What is your purpose here, Reid?" My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating quiet. I knew its game. It wanted me to question, to doubt, to forget. I pressed on, my eyes scanning the crumbling stone for the faint, almost invisible sigil I'd seen in the old plans, a small, circular depression, barely an inch across, meant to receive the box. The entity knew my plan was tied to this place, to this object. The corridor began to warp. The air grew impossibly heavy, pushing down on my shoulders, making each breath a struggle. This time layered with other voices, familiar yet distant, a colleague from the guild, the distant sound of my mother's laughter. The voice of the old man who sold me my first restoration tools. You have no home. No past. No future. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, gripping the box so hard my knuckles ached. My name is Reid. I restore things. I fix what's broken. I repeated it like a mantra, a shield against the insidious assault. When I opened my eyes, the corridor was gone. I stood instead in a vast, empty expanse of white, featureless and blinding. There was no floor, no ceiling, just an infinite expanse of nothing. Panic clawed at my throat. My childhood home, the scent of sawdust in my workshop, the specific weight of a chisel in my hand, all fading, like old photographs left in the sun. Who are you? The entity demanded, now a chorus of disembodied voices, growing louder, more insistent. What is your name?
What have you done? Who do you love? My mind was a battlefield. It was trying to erase me, to make me a blank slate, a vessel for its own forgotten horrors. I could feel the edges of my identity fraying, the threads of my consciousness unraveling. My hands, my feet, were they really mine? The box in my hand felt suddenly foreign, heavy, meaningless. No. A spark. A memory, sharp and unyielding. That was my work. That was me. My name is Reid, I rasped, the words tearing from my throat, raw and defiant. The white expanse flickered, momentarily showing the damp stone of the corridor. I am Reid. I fix what is broken. I remember. I forced my eyes open wide, searching through the shimmering illusions. My resolve was a fragile dam against an ocean of oblivion. I fought for every memory, every sensation. The smell of the linseed oil, the specific grain of a mahogany table, the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly restored hinge. These were mine. Then, a fleeting glimpse. The sigil. It's meaningless, the entity shrieked, its voice now a cacophony of agony and fury, as if my resistance caused it. Pain. You are forgotten. But I wasn't forgotten. Not yet. I stumbled forward, my legs heavy, as if wading through sludge. The box, which had felt foreign, now felt like an anchor. My anchor. With a surge of adrenaline, I dropped to my knees, the stone biting into them. My hands trembled, but I held the box steady. I aligned it with the sigil, the intricate carvings on its base fitting perfectly into the shallow depression. As the last edge settled into place, a low, resonant thrum vibrated through the stone, deeper and more powerful than anything before. The corridor convulsed. The air screamed, a sound like 1,000 souls being torn asunder. My head felt like it was splitting open. Memories flashed before my eyes, my first workshop, a specific antique chair I'd spent months on, the face of the kind old woman who'd bought it. They were vivid, real, mine. The entity was trying to drown them, to consume them. But I held on. I focused on the box, on the task. My fingers, guided by instinct, found the small, almost invisible switch on its side. I pressed it. A high-pitched shriek, unlike anything I had ever heard, tore through the air, filled with ancient rage and agonizing pain. I collapsed, gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. The air felt lighter, though still heavy with the lingering scent of ozone and something akin to burnt sugar. The box, still radiating a faint, internal glow, sat firmly in the sigil. I had done it. I had pushed it back. But as I lay there, my vision blurring, I realized the cost. I was whole, but irrevocably changed. The battle for Reid had been won, for now, but the war, I knew, was far from over. My legs felt like columns of lead, each step a monumental effort, as if I were dragging myself through thick, viscous tar. The sigil, a dark, jagged scar on the floor, pulsed with a faint, internal light, a dying ember perhaps, or merely a phantom echo of the power that had raged here moments before. I still clutched the box. My anchor, I'd thought. But an anchor implies weight, a connection to something firm. Frayed. The entity, whatever it had been, was gone or contained. I wasn't sure which, and the ambiguity gnawed me. The immediate, suffocating pressure had lifted, replaced by an unsettling quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a scream, leaving the eardrums ringing with phantom noise. Victory! I had won. But what had I won? And what had I lost? I looked down at my hands. They trembled slightly. My grip on the box was white-knuckled. My palms were slick with sweat. But the crucial details, the why and the how, were obscured by a thick, gray fog. Reid. Yes, that was still there, a solid bedrock. But beyond that, it was like peering into a vast, empty chamber. My profession? Antique restorer. The manor house. The inheritance. These were present, but they felt like facts I'd read in a book, not memories I'd lived. The warmth, the texture, the intricate web of emotions and personal context that should have accompanied them, those were gone. I leaned against the rough, cold stone wall of the corridor. A faint, metallic clang echoed from somewhere deeper within the structure, or perhaps it was just the ringing in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force the missing pieces into place. My parents' faces. A childhood pet. A favorite meal. Nothing. It wasn't just individual memories that were absent, it was the feeling of them, the personal resonance that made them mine. My past felt like a collection of data points, meticulously catalogued but utterly devoid of emotional weight. It was as if someone had taken a fine-toothed comb through my mind, carefully extracting the essence of who I was, leaving behind only the skeletal structure. I opened my eyes, staring at the sigil on the floor. It was fading now, the faint light guttering out. It looked like nothing more than an ancient, meaningless scratch on the stone. Was it truly contained? Or had it merely retreated, satiated by the feast it had consumed from my mind? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. What if this wasn't over? What if it was merely waiting for me to rebuild, only to devour again? I pushed myself off the wall, the box still clutched tight. I needed to leave this place. But where was this place exactly? I knew the name, but the context, the journey to arrive here, the reason I'd risked so much. It was all a blur. My determination, once a fierce, burning flame, was now a flickering candle, threatening to extinguish. I could visualize its crumbling facade, the overgrown gardens, the dusty rooms. But the emotional connection, the sense of ownership, the drive that had propelled me through countless hours of meticulous restoration, that was strangely muted. It was a house. My house. The corridor stretched out, seemingly endless, each cell door a silent tomb. I passed a window, high up, barely a sliver, showing a bruised, gray sky. Dawn, perhaps, or dusk. I couldn't tell. The horror wasn't in what I saw, but in what I didn't feel. No surge of relief at the sight of the outside world, no pang of longing for familiarity. Just a blank, unsettling neutrality. I was Reid, yes. I knew my name. But the substance of Reid, the intricate tapestry of experiences and emotions that defined him, felt irrevocably torn. It hung heavy, like a shroud woven from stale air and forgotten screams, pressing down on me, trying to flatten me into the dust of its history. I don't know how long I'd been in there, or how I'd even gotten so deep. Time had lost all meaning, dissolving into a continuous, suffocating present. All I knew was the cold, the metallic tang of something ancient in my mouth, and the relentless whisper that wasn't a sound, but a thought placed directly into my skull, "You are ours." You are nothing. But I pushed back. I had to. My hands, despite the tremors that ran through them, found purchase on the crumbling plaster of the wall. My fingers scraped against the rough surface, dislodging flakes of paint and grit. Each small victory against the inertia, each tiny chip of the wall I felt under my touch, was a spark. It reminded me of my craft, of the painstaking process of restoration, of rebuilding what was broken. That was my identity. Not this. With a ragged breath that tasted of decay, I forced myself to focus. The corridor wasn't just a place, it was a nexus, a focal point for the entity's insidious presence. I wouldn't be another name on its invisible ledger. I remembered the last piece of the manor's original framework I'd uncovered, deep beneath the floorboards in the library, a small, lead-lined box, meant to contain the most precious, the most dangerous secrets. It had been empty, but the intent was clear: to contain, to isolate. It was an anathema to the entity, a symbol of resistance. My mind, still fractured and reeling, latched onto that idea. Contain. Isolate. I didn't have a lead box, but I had my hands, my will, and a desperate, burning need to reclaim myself. I began to chip away at the walls, not randomly, but with a frantic, almost ritualistic precision. I wasn't just clearing plaster, I was trying to expose the underlying structure, to find the true bones of the house, the parts that predated the corruption. I scratched, tore, and clawed, until my fingernails were raw and bleeding, until my shoulders ached with the strain. And then, a flicker. It was enough. I kept going, fueled by a desperate hope. I imagined the corridor as a wound, and I, the restorer, was trying to clean it, to expose the healthy tissue beneath. I wasn't trying to banish the entity, not anymore. I was trying to contain its reach, to seal off this particular conduit. Finally, with a guttural cry that ripped from my throat, I tore away a large section of rotted wood, revealing a smooth, unblemished stone beneath. It felt cool, inert, almost defiant against the surrounding decay. I pressed my palm against it, pouring every ounce of my will into the act, imagining a barrier, a seal. A shudder ran through the corridor. Not just the physical vibration of the old house, but a profound, sickening recoil, as if something ancient and vast had just been struck. The leaden feeling in my legs receded. I was still exhausted, still broken, but I could move. I could leave. I stumbled out of the manor, the morning light a blinding assault after the perpetual twilight within. I didn't look back. I just walked, leaving the property, the town, everything behind. I sold the manor without a second thought, practically giving it away. I bought a small, unassuming cottage miles away, nestled in a quiet valley, far from anything that resembled the ancient, hungry architecture I'd left behind. For weeks, I slept. Deep, dreamless sleep that was more like a coma. When I finally emerged, the world felt muted. The colors weren't as vibrant, sounds were duller, and even the taste of food seemed distant. I tried to resume my work, to restore a delicate porcelain figurine, but my hands, once so steady and precise, trembled. My focus fractured. It was like trying to hold water in my cupped hands. A colleague, a quiet man who occasionally sent me pieces for evaluation, visited once. Different. Thinner. And your eyes. He trailed off, shaking his head. I just offered a tight smile, blaming it on the stress of the manor. He didn't press. But he was right. I was different. The victory in the corridor, the sealing of that terrible place, had come at a cost. The entity fed on memory and identity. I had fought it, yes, but it had taken its pound of flesh. My own memories were hazy, fragmented. Not just the manor, but my childhood, my early career, they were all there, but like photographs bleached by the sun, their details faded, their edges blurred. One evening, months after my escape, I sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the pane. I leaned closer, trying to make out my features in the dim light. My face was gaunt, true, and there were new lines etched around my eyes. But it wasn't just that. As I stared, a subtle shift occurred. The eyes in the reflection weren't quite mine. And the expression. It wasn't fear, or exhaustion, or even relief. It was something else entirely. A quiet, knowing hunger. It wasn't my pulse. It was something else, something inside me, something that had settled there, taken root. The entity hadn't been banished. It hadn't been destroyed. It had merely found a new vessel, a new place to rest, to feed. My own identity, fragmented and weakened, was now its larder. I wasn't repulsed. I wasn't terrified. A strange, calm acceptance washed over me. A subtle awareness, a faint echo of other people's memories, their identities, brushing against the edges of my own diminished consciousness. Like a phantom limb, I felt the phantom hunger. I was no longer just Reid, the meticulous antique restorer. I was something more. Something less. A twisted victory indeed. The horror wasn't what the entity had done to the manor, but what it had done to me. And the most terrifying part of all? I was beginning to understand. I was beginning to like it.